All right, welcome back to the book of Romans. Again, I'm your teacher, Dr. Benjamin Olson, and let's get right back into chapter 1, verses 16 and 17, the theme of the book of Romans. Paul states very emphatically, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation to everyone who believes, for the Jew first and also for the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from heaven, revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith." Now there is a lot to unpack in these two verses that ultimately is going to be that's going to give us a trajectory for the rest of the book and tell us exactly what we're going to be seeing in the rest of the book. So let's unpack these two verses. First, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ." Notice here is the gospel of Christ. The critical text, if you have an ESV and NASB, might not say of Christ, but in the majority manuscripts that are preserved for us, you can see this in New King James, is "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ." That this isn't just simply any good news. This is the gospel of Jesus, the good news that brings salvation. So he says, "I'm not ashamed of this." Notice he's saying this. Paul doesn't usually seem to be ashamed of anything. He seems to be rather bold in everything that he says. However, he wants them to understand that he is not ashamed of this gospel, because it's usually the gospel that gets Paul into trouble. It's usually the gospel of Jesus Christ that causes Paul to be thrown in jail and persecuted and left for dead and stoned. And flogged and all of those other things. Eventually, Paul would lose his very life because of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And he says, "I have no regrets. I have no shame. I am unashamed of this because," the word therefore, "because it is the power of God to salvation." These two words so vitally important. Power of God. The word there, dunamis. It's the ability of God, not the authority of God. That would be another word for power, exousia, which is authority, that's used in Matthew 28, 19, and 20. But instead, this is the power of God, the dunamis, the ability of God, the dynamic ability of God to salvation. This is God's way of saving. We're going to see this in chapter 3, verses 21 through 26, that ultimately this is the only apparatus, only mechanics that God can use to save unrighteous mankind. It's the power or the ability that God has to reach out and not only justify the unjust, but remain just himself. That he's not just simply excusing sin, but rather he is justifying by faith those who are unjust, which is a brilliant way for God to reach out and allow unbelievers, or allow the unrighteous to gain righteousness, not because of righteousness of their own, but because of simple, pure faith. We'll get into that word faith here in just a little bit. "For everyone who believes." Notice this is indiscriminate. Everyone who believes. Paul does not, and I'm going to make several statements throughout our time together in the book of Romans that if you have a Calvinist background, if you've heard this taught from a Calvinist perspective, you might find offensive, but I don't care, because Paul uses these terms. He says, everyone who believes. So anybody that believes, anybody that expresses faith, can and will be saved. It's God's power to save the unrighteous. Notice he doesn't say for all who are elect, just all who believe. That's very, very important. We're going to major on the majors here. We're not going to read into this or try to reinterpret the word everyone to mean only the elect, because it's anyone who expresses faith in Jesus Christ alone for their salvation will be saved. The power of God to salvation for everyone who believes. Notice it's the simple faith. The word believe there, that Greek word pisteuo, believes. It's the same word that's used in verse 17 for faith, which is the noun verb of pistis in the Greek. Those two words meaning the verbal form, the noun form, to trust. Okay, the word there, believe, or pistis in the Greek, is to trust. We're going to see this all throughout the book of Romans, that ultimately the only apparatus that God can use to save unrighteous man is through what I call the anti-work of faith. Ultimately, faith is reliance upon or confidence in someone else's ability to do something, not my own ability. That means that faith itself is not a work. Faith itself is not something I do, but rather faith is something I allow someone else to do for me, right? I always kind of give this illustration of being in a plane. I hate to fly. In fact, just in a couple of days, I'm going to be flying down to Chicago to see my son's graduation from Navy boot camp. He's a much stronger person than I to be able to go into a place like that. I don't even like to fly in commercial planes. Why? Because I am fearful. What I'm fearful is of losing control. I like to be in the driver's seat. I like to be the one who's in control, and be the one who's in control of my destiny in a car or anything else that's moving. And yet, every time I get into a plane, what do I have to do? And depending on the size of the plane, the greater the faith I have to have in that pilot and in that plane. I'm not the one flying it. I'm not the one who's doing it. I have to sit back and relax and enjoy the ride. That's all I have to do. That's what faith is. Faith is entrusting yourself to the pilot, who is Jesus Christ, to get you to the land of salvation, right? It's not your own work. It's someone else's work. You're entrusting yourself to someone else to do the work on your behalf. That's what believing is all about. So I like to use the word trust, or entrust yourself to. Ultimately, the point of salvation is not about me doing something, but allowing someone else to do something on my behalf. And the object of that faith always has to be Jesus Christ. All right, it can't be anything else. So it's the power of God to salvation to everyone who believes, faith. For the Jew first, and also to the Greek. And right away, we're seeing the big problem in Rome, is that the Jewish believers and the Gentile believers were at conflict with one another. And Paul is right away saying, listen, guys, the Jews are the ones who brought us Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ himself was a Jew. It's the Old Testament that brings us the promise of salvation. And so, yes, the offer of salvation must first go to Jews and then to Gentiles. This prominence or preeminence of the Jew over the Gentile we'll see all throughout the book in chapter 4. We'll see it again in chapter 5. We're going to see it a lot in chapters 9 through 11. Verse 17 then, for in it the righteousness of God is revealed. From faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. For the righteousness of God is revealed. This is so important. This is the most important thing. He's going to revisit this in chapter 3, verse 21. The righteousness of God being revealed at this present time. This word here, revealed, is in the present tense. It's not a past tense thing. It wasn't that it was revealed. It is currently being revealed through the preaching of the gospel. That the righteousness of God, that's ultimately the need of mankind. We need God's righteousness. God is the only righteous one. Jesus Christ, being God, the only one to live a righteous life. We cannot obtain it on our own. That's the ultimate need. Because we lack righteousness, we have the wrath of God that is currently on us, which we're going to see immediately in chapter 1, verse 18, which we'll get to in a later video. But this problem is because we have the wrath of God on us, because we are ungodly and unrighteous, we need God's righteousness to be placed upon us. And this is being revealed, what? Through faith. But not just any faith. This is where, it's going to be so important to see played out in the rest of the book, because it's from faith to faith. Because we're going to see that it's not just simply a point in time, I believed, therefore I'm justified. Yes, that happens. But in chapter 6 and chapter 7, I continue to believe and I continue to be sanctified. The past tense of I believed, point in time, I get justification. I get declared righteous. But then from faith to faith, continuing on in that present tense, I continue to believe, I continue to reckon that salvation to myself, and I continue to be saved in the present tense. Notice as it is written, and here he quotes from Habakkuk 2:4, the just shall live by faith. The just, those who are justified, those who are declared righteous. The word just, by the way, is another word for righteous. It's the same word in the Greek. Righteous and just are the same word in the Greek. The just shall live by faith. This can be seen in kind of two different ways. Notice the just shall live as in have life by faith, but also shall live out their lives in a present tense, walking by faith. Notice that both of those are in mind, I think. That it's not just the past tense of salvation, justification, that the righteous shall have life by faith, but the continued present tense, the righteous shall live or continue to live and walk in that faith. That ultimately, that justification is by faith, sanctification is by faith, and that's the whole point of the book of Romans, which we're going to get to in future videos. Let's stop the video right here, and we'll get into chapter 1, verse 18 in the next video.